This is very exciting for all of us here at Bloomberg, for the three of you, for many people who are here. We are launching and unveiling for the first time ever our inaugural Africa Startups to Watch list, 25 Africa startups to watch. There are a number of companies that are here, three of which we're going to be speaking to in a minute. Yes, thank you. It's very exciting for us in the region. If you just take a look at this QR code up here, you can see the list of 25 that literally was just unveiled earlier today. We whittled down a list from 2,000 entries that were actually sent to us, and some of these founders are really incredible what they're doing. They're tackling challenges and solutions on the continent, so it's very exciting for us. 9 of the founders are here with us, hopefully some in the room, obviously some in the room, but 3 are on stage with me, and I'm very pleased. Here's some of them that are here with us today. I'm pleased to be able to show the rest of the world really why we picked some of these founders for our inaugural list. So thank you all so much. Let's get right to it. Maybe you all can share a bit more about the inspiration behind your company and really what it was that you were trying to solve for. Akoto?
Sure. So I'll start with a quick story of a recent customer of ours. His name is Eric. Farmer Eric grows miracle berries, and miracle berries are a small red berry that is grown only in Western Africa. He exports miracle berries to the US mainly. He sells them on the local market. He was experiencing 60% post-harvest losses. So 60% of everything he grew and purchased from smaller farmers perished because he didn't have the right storage. Moreover, not only was he losing 60%, the remaining 40% he was selling at a discount because of the quality of the produce. So he was selling them on average grade B. So imagine 100% of the harvest. He was realizing the value of only 20% of the harvest. And this moves us at FreezeLink. It has consequences for the health of our countries because we're losing nutrients to the earth. It has consequences for wealth creation, not only for farmers, but also food insecure consumers in Africa. And thirdly, it has consequences for climate. You cannot get in a room a group of Ghanaian farmers without them talking about how the climate is affecting them. They may not use the language of climate change, but they know what it is. And so I'm the son of a farmer. I'm the grandson of a farmer. I was fortunate enough to have a career based in London, working in supply chain for companies like Unilever, Nestle, Red Bull. And I was so wowed about how modern supply chains worked. And it really made me think there has to be a better way. I remember being a child, visiting some of the farms of my family, and there would be so much waste on the floor that it would be a carpet of waste. You would walk on the farm and you would sink a bit. And you also had the sense that the fortunes of the country were also sinking a bit. So FreezeLink is a one-stop shop for cold chain. We exist to eliminate food and medicine waste in Africa through cold chain. If it's cold, we store, we transport, and we build with an engineering team that builds clean energy cold chain for food customers and for healthcare customers too.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Chilufya?
So I'll start with some quick facts around why we started eShandi. We know that over 1.7 billion people across the world have no access to financial services. And in Africa alone, that is around 57% of that population that is affected, around 95 million people. And this is also affecting over 40 million SMEs across sub-Saharan Africa, facing a $330 billion financing gap. These SMEs form the backbone of growing economies. These SMEs form 90% of all businesses in Africa and 60% of all jobs. And yet 80% of them receive no bank financing, particularly women-led and youth-led businesses. He was born to solve this problem. So after 3 years of working as a CEO in one of the leading financial institutions in Southern Africa, I made a bold decision to co-found eShandi to solve this problem. eShandi is a credit-led Pan-African challenger bank that is democratizing access to finance to small businesses and individuals across sub-Saharan Africa. We provide microloans, payment services, peer-to-peer lending for investments, microinsurance to historically disadvantaged income groups across sub-Saharan Africa. We are really banking the unbanked and championing financial inclusion.
Thanks so much, Chilufya. Dennis.
Morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Mwangi. I'm the managing partner for Thalia Psychotherapy. We started Thalia Psychotherapy because of one main reason. Mental health in Africa is one of the biggest disease burden. It affects close to 300 million people, and unfortunately, close to 95% of them are not getting treatment because most of them don't know they have a mental health issue. When we dug deeper, or what provoked us to basically look into it deeper was the issue of mental health in the police force. In Kenya, where I come from, majority of the police who were fighting around 2015, we had an issue with Al-Shabaab. So the police that were sent in the front lines to deal with them were coming back with PTSD. Majority of them were killing their family and friends, others were taking the gun onto themselves, and we were looking for a solution or for a way to identify those that we should focus on so that we address the issue. We were able to do that, and from that, we basically moved on to now doing it to the broader population. We use SMS and we use basic technology so that even those guys that are in the field or in the bush are able to receive the care they require, and we're able to know who to focus on. So at the moment, what we do is we integrate mental health checks as part of the hospital triage. What you're trying to do is to ensure that any hospital setup or any clinic in Africa can be able to offer mental health services. So that's what we are doing at the moment, our bread and butter. And as it is at the moment, we are doing close to 7 million screening, and we are hoping by the end of this year to have integrated into the national health scheme so that everybody, with every hospital visit, mental health is part of the solution that is being offered.
Thanks so much for that. I think just hearing from all three of you, and if you look at the startup list, very different innovations that we're seeing, health tech, agri-tech, fintech, and it really shows, it goes to show just what we're seeing from the continent and the innovations from the continent. I wonder if you guys can touch on where there are opportunities to scale some of these innovations, and maybe what are the barriers to getting some more startups and companies like yourselves off the ground? Start for us?
Yeah, so we've spoken a lot about AI innovation at this conference. For FreezeLink, we see the innovation on the hardware and the software side. So in terms of hardware, 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity, which is staggering. So the fact that the long-term costs of battery and solar continue to go down, long-term, is a game changer. What it means is that we can build power-intensive assets like cold storage that are solar-powered. And we have, at FreezeLink, we've begun to do that as part of a hub-and-spokes model. The second thing has to do with the innovation in terms of refrigerants. So the topic of refrigerants isn't a very sexy topic, but it matters so much in terms of food security. And there continue to be more innovations in terms of using non-greenhouse emitting refrigerants. And then AI does impact what we do tremendously. So just to give you an example, to build a bespoke modular solar-powered cold storage for agriculture, we need to analyze 77 different variables. Cold chain is complicated. With AI, that process, which takes a small engineering team, can be done in an instant. And this is one of the things that we are working on. And finally, when it comes to what does it take to have more innovators succeed and get along, the first thing I'll say is that Africa is not Silicon Valley. The only similarity is perhaps how we think about what is an ecosystem. So if we think about an ecosystem, normally we talk about risk capital and entrepreneurs, but how about government? How about the private sector? We are here at the behest of Bloomberg as a good example in partnership with the Qatari government. And then thirdly, how about our universities? So there are opportunities that we haven't realized on the continent many of our universities, especially the public ones, are not as strong as we need them to be. So I think the answer is to really think about what is an ecosystem, almost at the table with 5 different legs, and how do we strengthen all of those legs of the table to have a strong ecosystem to build up more innovation.
Chilufya, I saw you nodding over there.
Yeah, no, I agree with what he's saying. And also, we do know that in Africa, digital infrastructure is not fully developed, particularly in emerging markets. And so you find that smartphone penetration is low. So access to internet is also low, as Elon Musk also mentioned in his panel session around how we can improve people's lives by giving people access to internet so that they can get things for free, learn new skills, and all those kinds of things. And so in a market like in emerging markets where 70% of all transactions are through mobile money, that is last mile technology. So it's not about giving everyone access to a smartphone that's going to automatically disrupt everything, but also leverage of how do we apply AI through last mile technology. How do we reach the last mile? How do we reach people in the rural communities so that we can improve the standard of living and make it a fundamental right for everyone to have financial access? So that's where the opportunity lies with last mile technology, mobile money transactions, and the deployment of smart technology, digital infrastructure.
How do you convince, you all are solo founders, how do you, solo founder, right?
Co-founder.
Co-founder, okay, sorry about that. How do you convince, as founders, international investors to buy into some of the solutions that you have? Because in some senses, they're very localized. What's the convincing factor? Dennis, has it been a challenge to maybe get investors or people on board?
Yes and no. Right now, the interest on mental health and healthcare in general is very, very high. The issue has been, what do we call it? Getting funds away. How do they get returns? That has been the biggest issue for the investors. However, with solutions such as the way we are integrating with the national pair governments, doing things like impact bonds and looking for innovative financing solutions, they are able now to find, what is it called, a liquidity option, and they are now be able to basically come on board. So for me, getting the investors has been a challenge. However, for us, during the beginning, we were afraid of the VCs because we thought, or we still believe, they are going to interfere with the pricing. And when it comes to mental health, part of the challenge is the pricing structure. So we are trying to make as sure as possible the costs remain as low as possible. So back to your question, yes, the interest has been there. No, the challenge has been to ensure they get a liquidity event for them and to ensure that they get the returns they're looking for. So it's a catch-22 situation. And just to close, we are working with the pension schemes in Africa. Right now for them, the biggest issue is on the risk. So we are trying to de-risk healthcare in general for them so that when they invest, they get 2 returns in terms of the social return, in terms of a more secure and more enhanced healthcare system, and number 2, they get a market return on their capital.
Is the perception of risk fair when we think about investing into startups and some of the companies on the continent? Because there is, the risk is very closely associated, right, when we think about investment onto the continent, considering volatility in currencies, and you mentioned governments. Is it fair, though?
Certainly not. I studied in the US. I was lucky to get a scholarship to leave Ghana to study in America. I've lived in London. The amounts of capital that people in those places are able to raise just off a PowerPoint presentation is staggering compared to what I see startups in Africa looking for. And when you look at the human capital that we have in those different places, you can't possibly say that it is fair. That having been said, as an entrepreneur, you need to overcome. Yeah. So, I think that gravitating to investors, even foreign investors, who understand Africa and understand the need for patient capital, and oftentimes who already have made investments in Africa, those are the partners that we have found are the ones for us. So they've almost rejigged their perception of risk through experience in Africa. But for investors who are we've received more interest from more investors in non-traditional places.
Like where?
Like South Africa, the Middle East to an extent. These are investors who are very keen to work with the local investors before they jump in, which is not a terrible idea from my perspective.
And Chilufya, you talk about having that one initial yes, which opened the door to others. Can you share that story?
So we were bootstrapping when we launched our operations in 2019, but we got our metrics right. Our unit economics were well structured, and we understood the business very well. So we had the fundamentals, and we had the numbers right. And so we got a lot of no's. There were very rigid VCs, our traditional financial institutions, that basically had very rigid models, and we got no after no after no, but we really, really persisted and only got one yes. And that yes was in 2020 by Gender Lens Funds based out of the US. So it's very difficult to raise money locally. It's much easier to raise money from the US or the UK or other regions actually than from your local markets with people who are with you, who see you on the ground, who see the impact. It's much easier for them to see you operate for 5 years to see if you fail or you succeed. When you're successful, then they come. Mm-hmm. But at the time when you need them the most, they are not there. That's the unfortunate reality.
But you're seeing more and more interest as you continue to share your story?
So we see more interest from international investors than local investors. And we see more interest from regulators by creating sandboxes that allow us to operate. We innovated with a peer-to-peer platform where we raised over $6 million, more than we raised from international investors from the local market. That kind of alternative finance really are solutions around that startups can use to basically raise money or use it as a bridge round as they raise from international investors. I think it's just the intentionality that really we need to have. We see more interest from DFIs than actual VCs who are more comfortable if you're coming from more developed markets. My experience was that because I'm coming from Zambia, the interest rate we were offered was very, very high because we're deemed high risk. And I was told, well, if you're coming from South Africa or from Kenya or Morocco, it's much easier. We would lend to you at 5% per annum. But coming from a market like Zambia, they're giving it to me at 13% plus the SOFR, which is expensive. And then if I'm going to on-lend that to a small business owner who's struggling, how much interest am I going to charge this customer? So it's really, really unfair. And I understand their macroeconomics are beyond the same and policies, but I think we just have to do intention around who is the actual beneficial person behind this. Who's the one that's going to receive these funds? It's not the fintech. It's actually the end user who's the SME, who's forming the backbone of the growing economy. So do they need high interest loans to make their businesses grow? No. They also need patient capital. So we need fair pricing, not based on country metrics, but really around what we are solving and the impact.
Dennis, can you jump in?
For me, I'll take a different perspective. For us,
yes.
Thank you.
We like the applause.
For us, our focus has not been on the VC money. It's actually been on the end user, on the end customer. They are the ones who have been actually funding us. So for the longest time up to now, we have actually been bootstrapping. We got our first institutional investor last year, and that was basically to allow us to go national. But other than that, we find our biggest investors to be basically the end user, the customers, and they are the best when it comes to everything else, because at the end of the day, I'm not charging interest. And it's a proof of basically the way they love our product, let me put it that way. So at the end of the day, I think the end consumer is the best financier, and that's who has been supporting us all along.
Thanks for that. I want to ask you all how you see the next level of the startup ecosystem growing on the continent. We mentioned you're a part of the 25 startups to watch. There are hundreds of thousands of startups across the continent. Is it patient capital that needs to help continue this momentum to grow and build and maybe one day make the startup ecosystem similar to Silicon Valley? What do you think, Akoto?
I think I have 3 answers. Pension funds, pension funds, pension funds.
That's it. Okay, we can go now. Just kidding.
If you look at the performance of DFI-funded startups, objectively, you have to conclude that it hasn't worked. And anybody can look this up, do their research on Google. At the same time, our pension funds across Africa sit on trillions of dollars. And, is odd, because last year I went to Egypt for the first time, and I was talking to some investors, and they were talking about how they were trying to work with Egyptian insurance companies and pension funds to increase their investments in alternative assets. And I remember feeling a sense of deja vu, because they were the same types of conversations I've been privy to in Ghana. And so there is, from my perspective, an increase in momentum with challenging pension funds to fund alternative asset classes, including private equity and venture capital. So however you look at it, you cannot get around the fact that, we have an ecosystem with risk capital providers who are dominated by outsiders, which in and of itself is not bad, but the absence of that local capital, which is more affordable capital, which also comes with a degree of local expertise and door opening, that is conspicuously missing in the way that you do see in Silicon Valley.
So it's more of a local issue that you think needs to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree, Chilufya?
I agree, and there's a saying in Africa that we're building camels and not unicorns. And so what you will find is people are building more resilient businesses. They're looking for alternative ways to survive and growing and thriving in very harsh conditions. So you'll find that you have more camels than unicorns. And what you also find is more collaborations with corporate institutions and startups as well. And we see a lot more of mergers and acquisitions where larger fintechs that have raised more money are not able to expand further will start acquiring smaller startups that have built the traction, the scale, but haven't been able to raise sufficient funding. So we'll see more collaborations, acquisitions, and more camels.
And I actually spoke with someone earlier today who said, in China, I believe in 2008, there were no unicorns, and it slowly grew. So maybe that's not the trajectory that every continent, every country needs to take, and we should be a bit more diversified. I wonder, Dennis, what your take is on that.
Absolutely. In fact, from what she's talking about, collaboration, I believe, will be the biggest financing option for most startups, especially with corporates. Majority of us basically pay on a cash basis. So you can imagine the cash, the cash demand on the business. So if you're able to get credit terms for maybe 40, 60 days, 180 days, it becomes a very important financing option to many startups. And if you de-risk some of these things so that, for example, the big players, for example, in the earlier conversation, somebody talked about the supermarket, giving opportunity to so if you do those end-to-end solutions so that the market is able to absorb this and they're able to basically support the end user, and we provide the supermarket, for example, with a de-risking option so that we are able to deliver, the ecosystem in totality will grow together. So those kind of things are what we are supposed to be looking at. And in totality, what he's talking about, the pension scheme, is also very important because local capital understands the local problem and the local solutions which are available, and it becomes cheaper at the end of the day. So it's a multitude of basically the pension scheme and getting the local corporates to basically support the players in the industry. Yes.
Let's just finish off on each of your messages to people who maybe you're talking about local capital and local knowledge of the solutions. For those who are not sitting locally, I wonder what you would say to convince people to care, to value what it is that you're championing. Can you start for us?
So I'll quickly say that, Africa as a continent, we have so much low-hanging fruit. But on top of low-hanging fruit, we will have a quarter of the world's population in no time at all. In 2021, I received a call that made us the first company in the world to distribute the COVAX vaccines. And it was picked up by the New York Times and other international press. So the point is that it doesn't require, so much of our innovation has been, the destination is clear. There are opportunities to leapfrog what other companies and countries have gone through by virtue of some of the things we discussed before. And you cannot ignore the numbers that Africa comprises. The last thing I'll say is that in a world where the climate is changing, and in many African countries, the average African spends 40% of their income on food, some of these basic necessities that all the other panelists have spoken about. It's not the case that the demand is not there. So there is sometimes a first mover advantage, which is ours to seize.
Chilufya, do you want to close us out?
Yes, I would say to the teams and the people, the institutions that are deploying capital, if we can only be more intentional about why we're deploying the capital, and if the value really is about impact, really be intentional, and also get to see where the money actually goes. And to the people that are then deploying this capital that is being received, we need to talk less and do more. Yeah.
Dennis, do you want one more?
Sure. Basically, I'll end with this. There's no health without mental health. And to basically say the risk that you believe is there in Africa is not there. It's just that you're looking at it from a different perspective.